You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. It is April 22nd, 2023. And welcome to our show where we bring you the people and the organizations that are fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And today we are having a special guest with us. We are interviewing Joshua Rodriguez, who is a candidate for the 2024 Libertarian Party nomination for U.S. President. And so we just recently talked to him on another show where we talked about his background and why he wants to run for president and stuff like that. But now in this show, we're going to dive in a little deeper on a lot of issues because there's a lot of different topics to talk about. So we'll talk about different things like the environment and education and a whole slew of things. So we can take a deeper dive. But before we get into that, let me introduce you to the rest of our panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our lower left-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. In our upper right-hand corner, we have Joshua Rodriguez with us, our guest, and my name is Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So, James, can we bring up the so this is Joshua Rodriguez's webpage, so you can go there and find out more about his campaign and support or find out how you can help more on that end. But now we're going to jump into some of the topics. So to us, one of the most important topics on this show that we talk about an awful lot is education. And I think that's an important topic to Joshua too. And as we look at how the country is doing on education, we see that it doesn't seem like we're doing it nearly as well as we could. This is an article from Pew that was before the pandemic, and it shows that U.S. students are just kind of, doing so-so compared to the rest of the world. We could be doing a lot better, apparently. And that was before COVID, where everybody took a big hit on COVID because they locked everybody down and tried to force everybody into distance learning. And of course, it seems like we get a lot of static as well from the teachers' unions about trying new things and having more choice. So, Josh, what would you do to try and improve education in the country? What's your vision on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic in general, right? We know our population, our aging, our retirement aging population, age 65. 60% of our communities now are going into retirement. But on the other end of the spectrum, we definitely have low birth rates, those sorts of things. In my community in Colorado, we have one of the highest rates, unfortunately, of teen suicide. But second to that is youth gun violence. And so when we look at the records, right, high school graduation rates are pretty low. College entry rates are pretty low. College graduation rates are pretty low. But we know with standardized testing, there's a systemic issue with Latinx folks who score in the 30 percentile. And so the average is 50%. When you look at the community that's filling in that birth rate gap, by a margin of 60% are Latinx kids. And so if you're thinking about the community, who's going to be the next generation to lead us, it's Latinx, but they're historically, not performing in education. And so it's kind of sucky that we have standardized testing that's supposed to point to these issues, but we never do anything about them. It almost makes standardized testing kind of like irrelevant, especially if we're just going to sit around on our hands all the time. But when you look at issues within our education system, it's my intention to change it a little bit. I want to see our young people graduating a little bit earlier, entering the workforce, really focusing on the trades, those sorts of things. We did a survey in Denver, and the community said, do you like online education, right? And shockingly enough, 85% of African Americans said yes. And that's just an indication that they don't want their kids into the traditional public education system. But also we have issues of poverty, right? Your rent's going up. The landlord says, pay it or leave. You leave, right? And so a lot of kids that are going to be impacted by that are African Americans, are going to be Latinx kids. And so now they're in a new school. If you think of kids that are Latinx, right, their families might be migrating for work, to work on farms, those sorts of things. And so now you have these kids that are low performing who do travel a lot in your school. And so I want to change that a little bit. I want to have online education to where you are in a program, you're in a safe place, a safe environment, and no matter where you are, technically in the whole entire world, you're going to get an education that's right for you. And so if you're one of those people that are unstable, that's going to help support you in a big way. And then you're going to have dollar signs associated with your kids. The dollars follow you. So if you need in-person tutoring, those opportunities are going to be with you in schools. And I think schools right now are basically shutting down. Low enrollment is a big deal. And so this is one of those big topics. Your public charter school, your public education are fighting over kids right now. And so it's a big deal. Right now in my community, we elected what we call regional transportation districts, RTD. They're the buses, the trains, they represent your district. Democrats are actually using those folks to limit buses to schools. And so kids that are in charter schools are trying to fight for buses, right? That should go to the students, right? The students paid for that over time. It should be shared. It's not. And so they're also limiting buses to charter schools to fight that growth of charter schools. It's pretty big and growing. And so those county districts are also suing those charter schools, knowing that they're going to lose. And then they actually go a little bit above and appeal, knowing that they're going to lose. And so the cost of opening up a charter school is taxed heavily in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so, and I have the full intention to fix it immediately, the best I can.
Do you support universal school choice or parent choice, as it's called sometimes?
Yeah, that's the big debate, right? It's as contentious as talking about abortion literally in our communities. A lot of communities are going to be Republican, maybe Christian oriented, and have fights similar to what you're seeing in Florida. And so those sorts of things need to happen. But we do need universal school choice. My intention is to have a universal program that's going to be an online education system that's going to be high quality, vetted program where kids can go and get the best education possible, and that they don't have to suffer the consequences of the issues related to school to prison pipeline, because that is a very real issue for me that it needs to be solved. A lot of politicians are just going to say over and over and over again, and they're not going to do anything about it. I fully understand the issue. I participated in the Jefferson County School Safety Task Force at the Parkland shooting in 2018, and we evaluated every aspect of school safety, and threat assessments, those sorts of things are happening in the school. A lot of record requests, a lot of data, a lot of talking and discussing with community members and professionals and Columbine survivors. And so I understand education very well.
Yeah. What it does, one of the things I picked up on from what you were saying is it sounds like you're, I guess, for trying to be as flexible as possible with low income kids who might be moving, and school choice that might have a big remote aspect might really help in that aspect of things. So it sounded like that was kind of what you were mostly focused on. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's correct. I'm a homeschool person, so I've done fairly well in education, and it kind of was important to me. Community members might be a little bit scared about that sort of thing. It's something that we're going to have to understand. But in high school, in particular, that's going to be the basically the years where kids are going to get wrapped up into issues. And so, if we can graduate people early, if we can have accelerated programs where you have in-person opportunities and hybrid education. We can streamline that, accelerate it as fast as possible, and get those folks in trade schools and actually working in the workforce as fast as possible, while limiting their in-person in the public school, where they're going to get into trouble. 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. Now we're entering the time when policies of trying to kick out school kids don't work, and now they're trying to get law enforcement involved, and they may or may not be doing it in an inappropriate way. Regardless, they don't want to educate those kids anymore. They're trying to find ways to kick them out, actually. And so they introduce a law enforcement. That's why there's a big push for not having law enforcement in schools in the first place, because it limits more opportunities for that to happen.
Yeah, well, certainly moving away from the brick and mortar, would help with a lot of that as well, because then that debate goes away. But with your background, that's kind of a technical background in engineering, it sounds like that might actually help with some of this remote learning. But that brings us to another topic as well, which is digital privacy and censorship, and certainly that has some technical aspects as well. And James, can you pull that up, the visual? So we've seen some major challenges to our digital privacy and online censorship. And most recently, it was just about a year ago that Biden was trying to establish essentially a ministry of truth. It was something about a Department of Misinformation, I think they called it, but it's been tagged the Ministry of Truth, because that's essentially what it was: the government deciding what is and isn't true and telling everybody that data should be labeled that way online and potentially censored. But then we saw that spill over into private companies recently with the Twitter files stuff that's going on. Some of those hearings we've seen in Congress recently, where Twitter, after being bought by Elon Musk, actually opened the books on some of this information. And journalists Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss, and Matt Schellenberger, some of these people have been showing us what's been going on behind the scenes, where the government has been requesting that certain data be kept under wraps. And then, of course, with COVID, we saw a lot of our government officials outright lying to us. And, of course, some people saying, well, they were lies that had good intentions. But the bottom line is, it's government lying to us. And do we really want that? And certainly, in fact, even the former head of the CDC said that what was going on at the NIH was antithetical to science, which is a huge statement about the idea of censorship and, deciding what's going to happen with the American public behind closed doors. Joshua, if you were elected as president, how would you deal with this issue of digital privacy and censorship that's happening right now? Because these issues are right in front of us.
Yeah, well, there's actually a big one right now. Twitter is not called Twitter anymore; it's called X Corp, right? And so that was just an opportunity for that company to change. It's really hard to know why. I'm not going to say why, but right now there's a big worry. Germany right now is saying you're not doing enough misinformation censorship on your platform, so to fine you $20 billion. That's the exact worth of the company, right? And so maybe that's why it's X Corp. But we know that proxy governments can happen, maybe. So maybe the Biden administration is connecting in some sort of interesting way with Germany to combat misinformation. They need to abide by the CAIA policies, what's going on, XYZ. If you don't, this is going to be your consequence. Those things, even though they're trying to be inputted in organizations and government organizations in the United States, is happening worldwide in different ways. And so we do have to be intensely worried about those things. You can call what I just said conspiracy or not. Just even the idea of that being true is absolutely scary. And we know that government is absolutely capable of all those opportunities to be happening. Digital privacy is something that's going to be absolutely important. That's something that I care about personally. My kids don't participate in social media. It ruins the fun of their environment. It's just something that I understand that, I don't trust Facebook with data. I know we talked about in the last show TikTok, and maybe the libertarian viewpoint is to keep TikTok alive in some sort of way. But I'm not going to let my kids on the platform because I'm really concerned about data privacy in general. We should maybe teach kids about data privacy in some sort of way, how you're being data tracked, what apps are actually trying to do when they solicit you with ads, those sorts of things. If I talk to my kids about it, they're just thinking I'm a crazy person. So censorship is huge too as well. We know that everybody knows about it with the Twitter files. The proof was in the pudding when those files went live. But I feel sorry for those young people, that one James feller who released all the top secret records on the Ukraine side of things, right? Why did you give access to a 20-year-old of top secret files? I don't know. But it happened. I applaud that young man, and I can't wait to pardon him. There's plenty of other people that have encrypted platforms that are sitting in jail right now. There's a lot of issues. Obviously, I understand a lot about it. It's going to be part of my policy platform. We're going to get a lot of things done. And I think both Democrats and Republicans, maybe Republicans more so. But big tech, really, we talked about this earlier in the last show. Apple came up with an update. Hey, with just Facebook. Facebook wants to cross-track you with other apps. Do you give permission? And you obviously, most people are saying no because they lost half of their revenue in like one day, literally. And so data privacy is important. Censorship is absolutely important as well.
So I mean, I'm trying to understand your position here, especially in light of the statement about pardoning the guy who released all that classified information, who leaked the classified information. Are you saying that we should have no classified information, or what exactly is your position where classified information is concerned?
My position is that we should not be in a war with Ukraine, and that absolutely releasing those documents limit the United States' capability of furthering any involvement with Ukraine and Russia. And so by him doing that, slowed it down, maybe just long enough for Libertarian to be president of the United States, so we can really start ending these wars worldwide. Right now, China is collaborating with Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, North Korea, and they're becoming a stronger unionized organization to where that's a really big concern for the United States. It's actually bringing us 2 steps back. Meanwhile, the United States is trying to get 2 steps forward and have some sort of positive gain on these issues worldwide. I don't know what classified information there needs to be, right? If you're saying that we have nuclear weapons, that information needs to be classified. I don't think so, right? We need nuclear proliferation is something that's important to me. We should have no nukes, right? If you're saying that we're developing weapons, that's obviously going to be classified information. But if we're collecting data on the general public, right, that should not happen. So when you're hiring me as a libertarian candidate, we're going to be ending the CIA, those organizations, the FBI. That's a lot of top secret classified information. If you're saying that classified information is, hey, we're investigating drug cartels, a libertarian president like myself is going to end the drug war, right? Worldwide, we need to be focused on things like space, right? Energy, those sorts of things. And so technically there shouldn't be any classified information, in my opinion, because then we're wasting a lot of time on nonsense.
It does seem like if we are going to have some sort of defense, there probably needs to at least be some sort of classified information with having a Department of Defense. I mean, certainly if it's a police force, then it seems like there needs to be very little classified. But if we're worried about a military coming over our border, we might not want them to know where all of our all of our lines of defenses were. But this brings me back to that one point that you had on Ukraine. Is the main issue that you would like there, or that you support the fact that he brought out these secrets because you want us out of the war with Ukraine, or is it because the government was lying to us about the war in Ukraine? Because I mean, to me, as a libertarian, that seems to be the front and foremost issue, when the government's lying to us about things, and that's this seems to be right along those issues with WikiLeaks and Snowden showing us that the government was tracking us when they told us they weren't. So I'll throw this back to you real quick.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to visit Los Alamos and the labs that built nuclear weapons and Sputnik, the space satellite back in the day, right? And so I understand what classified information is, right? I've had security clearances destroying chemical weapons for the military, right? I've done that work as a scientist, so I know what classified information is, and I know why it's important. But within those leaks, there was leaks saying that there were several more balloons, right, from China hovering over the United States that were never notified to those states that was happening, and some they weren't tracked properly. So there is a danger of safety within our communities. But if you're worried about nuclear weapons and those sorts of things, that's one thing that we need to change. Republicans are going to be full force, let's go do war. And so that's your argument is, national security. But also too, that's going to be heavily important as well. That I understand national security, right? So that's what we're going to be focusing on in my administration. We're not going to be focusing on proxy wars over everywhere else and stuff like that. But we're going to do our obligations with South Korea. We have obligations that we set with Taiwan, those sorts of things. But we need to be moving towards peace 100%.
Well, jumping into the next topic on things that divide us, diversity, equity, and inclusion seems to be a way that it doesn't have to be, but it's become a way that the government is sort of dividing us. And James, maybe you could bring up the article here. This is just a short one, but essentially the Biden administration seems to have made it a mission to point out all of our differences and take every opportunity to divide us, even to the point where when you're talking about COVID relief and other stuff, with these emergency plans with people who have real need from the government, and then telling people they're prioritized by their skin color, which just seems absolutely insane. So Joshua, how would you handle these issues of diversity and equity and inclusion, or identity politics, I guess? How would you handle some of this stuff as president?
Yeah, I look at things like gay marriage, right? Or even like having a certificate of marriage, right? Those are all taxes. Who you love, what you do in your own home is who it's basically your identity, and you should have the full liberty to do that. Without infringing on other people's rights, right? Because we need to keep the peace. But all these identity politics, it's going to be important to folks because we don't want something bad to happen like 2020 riots, right? Black Lives Matter, those sorts of things, because it disrupts the community. But we as a government. United States government, we've made treaties with the indigenous people a long time ago that we're not prioritizing now. We made basically false promises. And so we have to go back, fix those things while we move forward. And so that's pretty much my platform as well. I obviously within 4 years would have a lot to tackle, and I intend to do that 100%. I'm going to be a workhorse for those people that don't really have a voice. And so I'm going to fix a lot of these issues. It's also politics too. It could be fake news. It could be a lot of sorts of things, but in reality, there are people out there who have concerns about themselves, and they need services. They have a right to their body. I know the Libertarian platform doesn't really talk about things like transgenderism, those sorts of things. They just have a blatant statement about individual liberty and individual rights. And it really goes into things like issues like abortion, those sorts of things. The Libertarian Party doesn't talk about those things, right? People get breast augmentation. People literally hang themselves, putting hooks in their back, jewelry, all sorts of things that people do to their bodies. To say that by law you can't do this, or you can do this, but you need a certificate. The federal government should have no say in what people can or cannot do in their personal lives, period, really.
Does that include abortion, is what you're saying?
I was raised Christian, so I'm pro-life. I don't want to see the death penalty. Obviously, I'm not going to be interfering with state rights. And at the national level, abortion is not necessarily something I'm going to tackle. But I understand that we have population, potential for population collapse. And so I was one of those people that needed help, right? I had one child in my undergraduate degree, and I had another child during graduate school. And so having kids is obviously something that's important to me. But I didn't necessarily have the resources to have kids, right? To be able to go to school, I had to work my butt off paying for daycare, those sorts of things. But if you're a young woman, the highest rates of abortion is those girls. They're going to have an abortion during college because they're focusing on college. That's important to them. And then they might not have kids for quite a while because now what's important to them is focusing on their career. And so obviously Colorado has one of the highest rates of abortion. You add that with youth gun violence and teen suicide, it's a huge number. That means within your county, you're getting 1 to 2 young people dying by suicide or youth gun violence in our community, and it's it's absolutely tragic, right? And so it's something that I'm just trying to fix, but we need to figure it out. It's not just a cut and dry thing, especially for a libertarian candidate like myself.
Well, I think jumping that gives us a good sense of where you are on identity politics. This one will probably be a quickie, but James, maybe I could get our invisible hand. We could pull that up. Yeah. So the debt, obviously, this is one of the biggest internal threats I think that we have, is that we've spent so much money that now we see inflation is starting to creep up on us and everything else. But I mean, this is our Treasury page. You can find that at fiscaldatatreasury.gov. So we're not making this up. This is what it looks like. I mean, over time, 1922, see, it's way down there. We're at 2022, and it is just grown massively in recent years. And to see how that relates to the size of our economy, we have this chart from the CBO, and that shows the debt to GDP ratio, to the gross domestic product. And so you can see the last time we had debt to the size of our economy that was like this was after World War II, when we were literally in a struggle to save the world, I guess you might say. And you kind of have to wonder what we got for it now, because I mean, then you could say, okay, that was maybe a big deal, but today, what it's sort of scratching your head. We spent all this money, where the heck is it gone? What would you do as president to try and I guess curtail some of this, try to get this debt headed back in the other direction?
Yeah, a lot of people are coming up with ideas about the IRS, right? Libertarian viewpoint is to abolish the IRS. I just want to streamline it a little bit, make it more simplified, get rid of a lot of the deductions and a lot of opportunities to, companies are going to say, oh, I don't want to pay taxes. Okay, you don't have to pay taxes. Yes, you do, right? You're not going to get any special subsidies. None of that's going to happen. But we're also going to end war, right? End war. And so that $1.5 trillion annually that goes into military spending is going to be cut, right? You're going to be paying taxes like usual. That's going to, pay towards the debt. At some point in time, hopefully, not too far in the future, we can start getting refunds. Now the government's spending less, we don't have the FBI and the CIA. States have their states' rights. They're operating in policing and doing what they have to do internally without the interference of the federal government. We could start paying that down. And so maybe the IRS is still around. Sorry, but when you pay in, the government says, hey, we didn't spend any money. Now you get refunded. In Colorado, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is called TABOR. Quite a while ago, a Republican candidate said, hey, if the government doesn't spend that money, it gets refunded. And so last year, for the first time, everyone got a refund, legitly. It was quite astonishing. But in other states, that refund doesn't go back to you. And we look at things like land taxes. I know that's a state conversation, not a federal conversation, but your house goes up in price, you pay more land taxes. There's no, here's the cap. But what are they doing with all that money? My land taxes went up $400 each month. Last year, it went up $100. So that's a big jump in land taxes. So how are they spending that money? I have no clue. Well, I do have a clue. They're spending it on themselves. They're overspending it on different things because you spend that budget and whatever you don't spend goes back in the pot. So at the end of the year, you're going, oh, what do you want to buy? To justify your budget. That's always increasing. And so that's a very, very bad thing. That same philosophy we need to do at the federal level.
Yeah. Hey, Tim, were you going to jump in on this one, or? Okay.
No, I think he means when we're going to do the same philosophy on the federal level is that we're going to refund the money instead of figure out a new way of spending it. I think that's what he meant.
Yeah,
that's all.
exactly.
Okay.
The taxpayer of rights within Colorado, it's going to be the same way. You get a refund. We're not spending that money. It goes right back into your pocket. That's where it should have been in the first place.
Okay. And certainly anybody who's worked for a government agency knows that, much as you said, if you don't spend the money, then your budget gets cut the next year. So yeah, you have this terrible incentive inside of government to buy things that you don't necessarily need. So it's it just seems like it's a never-ending problem. But this brings us up to a scary solution that some in government might be looking for. And Jane, maybe we could bring this up, and that's the idea that they may be pushing us towards a digital currency. And there's a lot of talk in Europe about them doing that right now, of them pushing the Europeans that way. And some of the talk is like, hey, if you spend over a certain amount of money, and it's got to be in this digital currency, and therefore they'll know everything that you're spending over a certain threshold on what you're spending it on, and they have the ability to turn it on and off. And we saw in Canada how that can work out recently with protesters, where people tried to send people money who were standing up to protest, and the lockdowns that happened there during the COVID lockdowns, and the government just shut their money down so that they couldn't even get at their own money, which is just absolutely crazy. So what's your thoughts on this idea, this potential push towards digital currencies?
Yeah, a little bit of what you said about the COVID issues with protesting and the truckers, those sorts of things. It goes a little digital privacy, censorship combo. It's a related question, 100%. Right now, the digital limit, it's 20,000. That's a huge number. So the Biden administration is saying that they want to bring it down to 600. That scares folks because people pay their rent to their landlord using digital technology. I won't tell people what digital service people are using because I'm not going to advertise that. But now that wants to be tracked, and so are people going to get taxed on paying rent now too? Because locally you're paying taxes on everything you buy, and then at the federal government, the state, it gets daunting. It's scary, the censorship, because people really do want access to what you spend, and so whatever big bank you're using, they're going to collect that data. And what we know about like Cambridge Analytics, those sorts of things with Facebook, they're collaborating in a big way, and so if let's say a $1 billion company, digital company, we know they have email, they have searching, those sorts of things. Now they buy your bank. All of a sudden they know what you're buying, what you're searching. And so if you're a child, you're going to get inundated with all these things that say, hey, buy this, buy that. And now if you have a crazy thing called TikTok, showing you things, now you're getting not only censored, you're getting like brainwashed. It can be really scary. As a libertarian candidate, someone who's a scientist, I'm strongly believe in encryption, those sorts of things. And so if we're going to ever introduce these technology, it needs to be encrypted. Everything needs to be absolutely encrypted. And so if companies want to advertise, they need to go to the digital creators and work through them. Because that's where the money should go. They're the ones making the content. If they're trying to get access to your kids to sell you things, then no. I mean, come on. Right now, young people, they don't want to work. They don't want to do technology. And, definitely email me if you feel the opposite of that, Gen Zers. But, they want to be in a digital space. They want to be YouTubers, TikTokers, Instagrammers, those sorts of things. And so, but when social media companies don't help them to advertise themselves, they don't get interactions. And then the ending result is things like teen suicide, depression, those sorts of things. And so when you say digital currency, we're talking about digital privacy. We're talking about censorship. It's all intertwined. But, the way to to make a country disappear is to basically counterfeit their currency, right? So if you counterfeit their currency, it's going to destabilize them in a bad way. And so digitally, yeah, I get it. If you look at FTX, the Bitcoin company, the other Bitcoin company, right? They went down. I believe that they didn't necessarily go in it fraudulently because they were buying up companies to make their product better. But when it came to perform and to show their books, they didn't do it fast enough. They failed. And so, yes, they spent millions of dollars on nothing. And so I'm very, very on edge of any investment into cryptocurrency as well. Because I can go start a cryptocurrency and then just turn around and bankrupt it. Oh, we went bankrupt. Well, you took billions of dollars, yo. That's not. So that's a huge conversation. I don't necessarily think Biden is going to be able to fix that, and we should definitely not say yes to digital currency unless it's going to be encryption.
Yeah, I know one of the things, at least libertarians are sort of, if it's market derived, it's probably okay, but if it's government derived, then run away, I guess is the best way to say it. But and this is certainly one of the things we have is this government derived one that they're talking about. But on the other hand, they can, they may be able to wind up shutting down the market derived ones too. So this is just crazy. But anyways,
it's more like government control, because if they have a digital currency that is controlled by the government, they could know what the hell you're doing. Now, if it's a market derived, that's a different story, because then your data and your information is stored within the general marketplace as it is right now. But when you get into the government, you're on a different playing field, because this is a government tracking its citizens. This is a disaster in what is supposed to be a free country.
Yeah, but that was one of the problems, so Leon, we saw with Canada was that even though it was a market-derived currency they were sending over there, I mean, people were sending Bitcoins, as they tried to pull the Bitcoins out and give them Canadian dollars to spend, then suddenly the Canadian government was able to grab it and lock onto it and keep them from, accessing it. So it's just, it's pretty crazy. Tough issue. Well, another tough issue is the environment and energy, and that's always a kind of a tough one for liberty-minded folks. And James, maybe I could get the visual up here on this. This is an article from the Brookings Institute. It just shows sort of the changing views on things like global warming over time with Democrats and Republicans. And of course, you see there's a lot more Democrats out there who support these things than conservatives. And I think a lot of libertarians probably are closer to this conservative line on this issue. But, clearly, when we have these big environmental issues, like we just saw in Ohio, train coming off the track, spilling stuff. And, you could say, okay, that's a mix of government and private industry because, government has all these regulations on the tracks. But, the railroad obviously was shipping stuff that spilled. So, climate change is another one of those big things where, depending upon what you believe on the data, it is sort of this massive commons issue. If, you're putting more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, who decides, I guess, what you get to put in there? Some of the weird issues we've seen on this is, we can't even have a discussion now. I mean, this is back from when Trump became president. Perry, who was the Secretary of Education, he wanted to just get a chance to debate it open in public, but most people, it's sort of like they're locked in. Either you think it's a complete scam or you're on the other side, and you won't even hear the people who have concerns because you think that they're deniers. And so anyways, what's your thoughts on this? I know you've thought a little bit about it, Joshua, the whole climate change and environmental stuff.
Yeah, I'm a scientist. I think when you hire me as a president of the United States, you're going to get someone who's scientific minded. I understand this very well. I participated in climate change forums and debates talking about this very topic. So I was able to get feedback from the community, get to understand in-depth questioning about this. People say it's, global warming, it's not real, those sorts of things. But the fact of the matter is, within the last decade, Philippines got a tsunami and displaced 5 million people. That population growth has increased. So that displacement is even larger. When you talk about droughts, food, population migration related to environmental issues, it's going to impact the world in a big way. But if you look at Venezuela, I know quite a while ago we were talking about corn and ethanol, those sorts of things. Venezuela, they only use ethanol, and so you get more engine performance with ethanol. It's cleaner burning, right? So your engine lasts longer, and the emissions is absolutely lower. And so people can, if you hear words like flex fuel, those sorts of things, it's a real thing. In the United States, we can switch to ethanol. That's a sustainable energy source. We know fossil fuels is a finite resource. It's going to go. We know that batteries and metals like cobalt, it's going to go. By 2050, you're not going to have these resources anymore. And so we need to develop energy alternatives. And I'm not advocating a 0% for nuclear. And so that's a different conversation. I'll save that for later. But we're talking about like hydrogen powered cars, right? Companies like Rolls-Royce are developing rocket engines and plane engines that are hydrogen fueled sources. And so space exploration on the moon, looking for that super fuel, right? That protonated hydrogen helium, right? The moon's supposed to be abundant with that resource. And so Blue Origin is trying to do an international space station, which I support. And so they want to do an opportunity to mine the moon. Those sorts of things we need to be focusing on. So energy alternatives, they're there. There's opportunities. But we need someone like myself that understands it. And so I hope people vote for me when the time comes. But, those sorts of things I understand completely. And it's absolutely going to be part of my platform. Obviously, we talk about a lot of things, and I say I have a lot to do, right?
You do. So Joshua, if I told you that there's enough natural gas to last us 1,000 years at the current rate of consumption, would you believe me, or would you think that's just fiction?
Well, obviously, if you burn it all, it's going to just disappear, whether it lasts 1,000 years or not, right? People say that about nuclear energy, and we know in Japan there was their nuclear plant basically had issues, but most recently they ended up dumping 1 million gallons of nuclear waste into the ocean because they didn't know how to dispose of it, right? And so how we use our resources is important. In my opinion, fossil fuel should be in reserve. 90-something% of our military is run off fossil fuels. So if we're giving it away, if we're not storing it properly, if we're not saving it for that need, in 1,000 years, we won't have the military that we need, or X, Y, and Z. But no, I don't think we have 1,000 years worth of fossil fuels. Companies came out and said that they're running out, but you never know. The countries might find reserves of fossil fuels somewhere overseas, which they have pockets of natural gas. Those sorts of things definitely can happen.
Well, I'll just tell you something. I won't go into the weeds. Okay, there's something called natural gas hydrates, and we have an abundance of that is untouched at this point in time, and it's far more than 1,000 years of it available at current rates of consumption. But that's for another discussion we can have at another time.
Yeah, let's not go too deep. But this does get us into another issue, though, and that's
you got my interest.
There are issues too with I guess the back end of this topic is energy, and that brings us also into our other another topic as well as trade. And we see this issue where with energy resources, Biden had shut down his first thing when he came into office was to shut down the pipeline to Canada. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. Keystone, that's it. Yeah, the Keystone pipeline. And then he decided it was, even though he didn't want to see domestic fossil production, he decided it was okay to go around the world asking some of the worst dictators for their oil, which was kind of a funny thing. Maybe we could get a visual on that, James, real quick. It was just a picture of Biden fist bumping the Saudi Arabian prince there, trying to, I guess, get them to up their production. And by the way, they didn't work because they've cut their production. And of course, he's gone to Venezuela as well, asking those guys subsidized for oil. But so there's issues of trade here too, that, we used to be an exporter of energy and now we're an importer of energy again. But what about other issues on trade as well? I'm not going to say the name of this film, because when we did an interview with somebody who was in it, and it actually got blocked by Facebook, so I'm not going to say it. But there are issues with intellectual property too. And I believe you mentioned this in either earlier in this discussion or in the last show we did with you, where there's issues with maybe if China is stealing intellectual property or other things like that. So I guess, how would you handle some of these issues on trade? Whether it be energy or IP issues or whatever, because it seems like we're not sending as much out and we're taking more in, and all we're sending people is dollars that keep getting worth less and less and less.
Yeah, it's a great question, and just to piggyback off of energy, right, and pollution. Americans spend about 60% of their dollars goes to China for buying products, right, and the biggest proportion of greenhouse gases is coming from China, and that's because they use coal-fired power plants, right? And so when they're producing steel, they have the highest rates of pollution. So indirectly, the United States is really contributing to that issue in a big way. And so how we spend our dollar can change that. In my state, there was a nice investment from the Trump administration at that time, from our steel plant, that helped them produce steel in the United States, but they went 100% solar panel. Obviously, homes, it's too expensive, really. There's tariffs and taxes associated with putting solar panels on people's homes, but it's a positive alternative. But if we can get rid of things like tariffs and open up trade worldwide, it really does offer more opportunities for businesses to do business with us. I think if you look at places like India, right now they're neck and neck with China, and they're going to be the largest population in the world, and then China's going to dip down greatly, at least by 25% within the next 10 years, while India is going to keep growing. And so businesses in the United States have a great opportunity. Technology is scary, though. We do need to have, we do have some issues with even the drones. That's why I say tit for tat with wars with Ukraine. I know we're going back into that conversation, but the government gave drones to Ukrainians to send off. It has a bomb on it. You just use a remote video access tool, and you go directly and basically kill that unfortunate young Russian soldier that got sent there. But then Iran said, "Oh, we can help you, Russia," and they created kamikaze drones now.
No, looks like Joshua's connection might have froze.
Yeah,
you're back.
There you are.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So, countries do steal technology, but if we're sending kamikaze drones out there and starting that, then we just introduced that, and now another country is going to have to reciprocate in a bad way. So that tit for tat, I'm hoping to end. So the technology stealing is a big deal, but companies need to internally take care of their own proprietary information and safeguard that themselves. So that's going to be on them as well.
I just have one question. This Colorado steel company that got money from the Trump administration, and they started using, I guess they used some of that money to power their plant with solar panels. Is that correct?
Oh, good.
Okay, so do you recall from what country they purchased those solar panels?
Yeah, most solar panels do come from China, but I know the Trump administration increased the tariffs on those to basically cause kind of like the United States to be a opportunity for them to be a bigger supplier of solar panels. It's a question mark. I don't know that. I'm guessing that on the market, it's probably from China.
All right. Just curious.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny. You talked about certain technology that's used in aggressive ways, and that brings us. You've already kind of talked about this, but I'll just bring it up real quick for you to knock it out of the park. Military. What would you do on the military?
Yeah. I have just very huge concerns. I speak to young people all the time, and they're like, "Oh, I want to be a nurse, and so I'm going to go to the military. I'm going to make $100,000 a year." And I'm thinking to myself, "Yeah, okay, yeah, in a positive way. I'm not there to say pros or cons, but I have relatives that suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome, and so." They have mental health issues and substance abuse. And I had one of my best friends died by suicide. He was a military member. First responders, nurses, EMS, doctors, all those folks are going to be suffering traumatic situations. And so we have to applaud those people 100%. And so I think my candidacy is going to support them every single way we can. No administration will go a step further by allowing these folks to have access to medicinal drugs like cannabis, whatever they need. We're going to get them the opportunities to be successful. And that goes for the whole United States, really. So military is going to change a little bit. My motto is end war, cure cancer. And so we're going to start uniting as a global community to find some commonality to work on. We talked about the International Space Station. That was collaborative. No one was up there upset with each other. You're exploring space, you're shaking hands, you're doing legit space experiments, and you're collaborating. We should never be in some weird situation now where we have a space force. Like, how far do we need to get to a situation where it's never ending? The tit for tat we talked about, it just really needs to end. So we need to make amends, apologies, whatever it takes to get things done and fixed. The military is going to change. As a libertarian candidate, you could just the national platform and my platform, and it's going to change. It's going to change in a big way. And I think in my mind, it's going to be positive.
Well,
So
Ron Paul was.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to real quick insert. So Ron Paul was definitely for pulling in almost all of our, people overseas because we don't need to be there, in his opinion. Therefore, that's a big reduction. But go ahead, Leon. If I'm just assuming that was kind of where you were going with it.
Yeah. I just wanted to know when you say the military is going to change. I mean, what are the changes are we talking about?
Yeah, specifically those sorts of things. Where we are in the world diplomatically, we're going to speak directly with, Russia, China, Iran, continue our relationships with Syria, Saudi Arabia, North Korea. And I said this in our last broadcast that, when I'm nominated as president of the United States as a libertarian candidate, I'm going to go overseas and I'm going to start that peacemaking process immediately. Obviously, the countries are going to start taking me seriously, and I'm going to fly over there. I'm going to spend my time, and we're going to actually broker peace deals, a signature on paper.
No, looks like maybe the big tech overlords are trying to censor Joshua.
Yes, I think so.
Well, let's see. Give it a second to see if we can get Joshua back here.
Yes.
So, but certainly, I guess what I was getting at for the audience. Oh, there you are, Joshua.
Yes.
Okay.
We just refreshed a little bit. Yeah, okay. We just refreshed for a little bit. I wasn't sure if we were on or not. We're going to pull people from our military bases. Whether or not the country will allow us to operate bases and just make property in a diplomatic way. Those are things that I'm hoping for. Nuclear proliferation, right? Getting rid of nuclear weapons and working with other countries to do the same thing as well. Those are big changes immediately, right? And so if we can do one step forward in a positive way, that's going to be a great thing. Right now with Ukraine and Russia, they're uniting with China and Saudi Arabia and Iran in a big way. that puts us a little bit behind now. The last thing we need is China supplying, technology to North Korea. So now they have nuclear weapons. Maybe North Korea should have the right to self-defense like every other nation in the world. But that's not good for me because as a libertarian candidate, I don't want them to build nuclear weapons because I don't want nuclear weapons. I don't want Russian nuclear weapons. I don't want no community to ever have to worry about nuclear warfare. I think in general, people just need to understand that these warheads are just going to target military bases. So you live next to a military base, it's a target. Airports are going to be targets, right? I don't think any country is going to bomb a populated area like New York. It could happen, but but we have to make sure that when we do things, it really needs to be towards peace and unity.
Okay.
So Joshua, I know what your goals and aspirations are noble. I applaud you for that. But we cannot be naive to the fact that there's evil in the world. And some of that evil is directed against us, the United States. What do we do about that while we're trying to make peace in the world?
I was raised Christian, right? I was homeschooled at Christian schools when I was younger, and so those sorts of things. We're a Christian nation, and so the community members right now that are atheists, those sorts of things, other countries don't see that. They see us as a Christian nation, and so in their philosophy, that their philosophy might make us an antagonist in a sort of a way. And so basically what you might be saying or leading towards is there might not be opportunities for peace. But I look at places like Iran where, people were protesting. Those young people were saying that they don't want this. They're in jail for life in prison. And so I unfortunately know the CIA got involved, so there was no natural leader popping up because they always get involved with those types of, political protests in other countries and stuff like that. I would like that for that to change a little bit, to get an organic change within countries. But countries have the right to self-defense. They have a right to their religion and how they want to run the country. But I do have the hope. I have the faith. But both Democrats and Republicans right now, we saw the vote to end the situation in Syria. Both Democrats and Republicans said no, we need to keep it. And they were saying that was a national defense thing. They were legitimately saying that, and it's continuing, and we all see the negative effects from it.
It's amazing how many things we do outside of our country in the name of defense. but speaking of defense, we got just a couple more issues real quick to go over, and gun control is certainly one that is popped up all the time. We never know when it's going to pop up. The next time is a big issue. But you mentioned Parkland was a big issue for you and sort of your origins politically in getting, I guess, organized and stuff. And so what are your thoughts on gun control?
Yeah, school shootings is something I'm going to be focusing on, and especially youth gun violence. We had a young person in my community. He was scared in school, and so he used social media to find a weapon. He used Instagram. They call it MOM is the term, right? Metal on the market, and you just basically search, those sorts of things. Like, there's ways to find weapons through the back house. Unfortunately, they weren't going to sell him the gun, right? And he just ended up shot dead. We had another young person that was just in a mall, got in a social media conflict, right? That's how most of these issues are happening now, is through social media beefs. He was 13, got shot. Another community member continuing, stabbed, beaten, and shot, 13 years old. And it was almost no one got shot. It happening over and over and over again. So you talk to those victims, those community members, those who died by suicide. I reach out to those moms. I had a mother that, didn't respond to me And it took them 2 years to connect with me. They released the note of their child. I got access to their social media, those sorts of things, and worked with them to try to better understand their situation. And, social media has been a negative thing in our community with gun violence. And so we need to start understanding that young kids shouldn't have access to social media. And so that might be a little deviation from my platform, the Libertarian Party. Should kids have access to social media under the age of 16, 13, and those sorts of things? Those are things we need to figure out. I meet with people that advocate for gun control because they're the ones that have the most knowledge. And so I try to better understand everything I can about issues related to gun control. But when we talk about it, gun control, Chicago, your guys' home state, California, we're not really getting a lot of positive solutions. So maybe the solution is private security who has guns on school campuses, right? Maybe we should have guns be armed with weapons, or teachers be armed with weapons, right? We have to go we have to go crazy. We have to go radical. We have to do things that might not make sense, that we might not want to do, that might not be trendy to get things solved. If I was mayor of my city, I would probably develop a 2-shot pistol with ammunition and a voucher to go get gun training. And I would send that to every shop owner, right? If we arm 5% of our community, those robbers who are trying to target their next victim would be going, oh, they might have a gun. I'm not going to go into this shop because it's basically like robbing a gun store. You don't do it because the shop owner has the right to bear arms constitutionally, and we made it happen. So that's my idea of gun control. Your best defense is self-defense. We know police officers only respond to violent crime. They don't stop it. Their role is investigation only. And so if you're asking for help, you need to have that constitutional right. Just a little bit further, in Denver, there was a gentleman. This was a news organization. They went out during the 2020 riots, right, or protests, whatever you want to call it, in Denver. They hired private security. The security guard shot somebody, and we were like, they didn't have a license. You can't carry a firearm in Colorado unless you have a concealed weapons license, those sorts of things, blah, 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 right? This person should have got hit with major crimes. The DA was like, you have a constitutional right, Second Amendment right to self-defense. We can't combat that. So they dropped the charges. Maybe it was the news organization's help, probably. But in the end, no matter what the gun law is, you have a constitutional right to self-defense in Chicago, in California. Yes, you're going to have to go to court. Yes, you're going to have to deal with it. But in the end, folks, you have a Second Amendment right. And so gun control really is just protecting yourself.
I'm sure Tim will want to jump in, but real quick, I wanted to summarize. So it's about mental health with young people and controlling social media, and then more good guys with guns. That sounds like kind of where you're headed. Tim, did you have any thoughts on the whole gun control thing you heard from Josh?
Just a quick question, just kind of definition here. So is it the right? Does it come because we have a constitutional? It's talked about in our Constitution, or is that right pre-existing and a natural human right to defend yourself?
Yeah, from a Christian value, death is something that it hurts me thinking about it, right? So the death penalty, those sorts of things, those are huge concerns for our community. And so when I think of, that's what I think of. I think of the victims first. So when we talk about like safe injection sites, I don't want that in my community. I always try to think of the victim first and address that. Hey, I know you're a victim of gun violence. I know it's a truth and a reality, and I'm concerned about it too. And so when you start talking about things like guns, and your belief in the Second Amendment, For me, I think everyone should have a 30-round clip, AK-47 with, 2 magazines, a grenade, and a bulletproof vest in your home. That should be your constitutional right. Your taxes should pay for that or something like that. But I believe it's just a natural right in general, even though it's the Constitution, and we don't know what the 1,000 years worth of natural gas will get us, and what the future might look like. But we can't shy away from that. We say in Chicago, right? It's to end gun violence, and then but the people that advocate gun control, believe it or not, are law enforcement. If there's a rifle pointed at you across you're in a supermarket and there's a rifle pointed at you, you're not missing. You're gonna get shot. And so when you see law enforcement going into a school, applaud the crap out of them, legitly, because statistically they know it. They're not going to survive that incident. But that goes right back to gun rights. You have a right to bear arms. You should, in a school, in a church, in a storefront, a natural right to defend yourself, and that particular weapon is going to be something that's going to be necessary.
Yeah. Well, this brings us up. We're almost out of time here. So the last topic I just wanted to touch on real quick, infrastructure. Usually this is something that, it's not a big topic, I guess, for libertarians, but because every time we turn around, they want to spend a ton more under the guise of infrastructure. I just thought it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts, because every time there's another trillion or two, they're talking infrastructure. So what do you think about that, Josh?
It's scary the way you said another trillion or two. That's pretty scary. I know you guys. I know. Well, in California in particular, I applaud the idea of having transportation like a train from point A to point B. But when the government gets involved, it gets a little tricky, a little messy. You guys are, I think, like 20 billion for that train being developed in your community.
Yeah, they're projecting, I think, well over 100 billion.
Yeah.
I think
the bullet train.
Yeah. So,
that's highly well-traveled zone between Fresno and Bakersfield, or
a fast way to view cows. Back and forth.
Right, yeah.
The
99 and the 5 aren't good enough, apparently.
Sorry, go ahead, Joshua.
It's scary from an environmentalist point of view, though. Their solution is just expand the highway, and so that's more pollution, that's more cars on the road, that's more issues that don't need to be in place. So I applaud the idea of the train. That's my philosophy. It's just a cost. And anytime the federal government touches something, it hurts. It hurts in your pockets. But I think a private company wants to do a train from like Las Vegas to LA.
Yes.
And they're like $5 billion. I think they can do it. I think they can legitly do it. They don't have like union people like putting money in their pocket. They don't have like friends of friends. So that's the idea, the libertarian viewpoint. You privatize those roads, those sorts of things, you're going to get big benefits. Not to turn the conversation, but housing is a huge issue for our next generation. Our young people don't want to necessarily get into the trades, and we have our retired folks going out of the trades. And so it leaves a lack of housing, and housing costs are going up. And so if you're trying to subsidize in some sort of way your pocketbook, public transportation is going to be absolutely necessary. Fast transit and buses. Millennials, believe it or not, they don't drive, and Gen Zers are like, I don't have a license. I have a license. I do have a license, by the way. But communities that have high density, they don't. They just use bikes. They use the electric bikes that are on the side of the road, the scooters and stuff. So it's changing. Transportation's changing.
Yeah. Well, it just seems like, when you mentioned expanding the highways, and so their solution is to build a big train. I mean, that's kind of command and control. It just seems like you put a price on the pollution, then let everybody else figure out the best solution for it. Always seems to be a better way to go. But anyway, that's just a digression. But I guess we've gotten just about to the end of the talk. And James, could you bring up Josh's webpage again. So this is where you can go to check out Joshua's website. You can find out more about how you can help him out or understand his issues more. He does have, a platform page, so you can dive in more to some of the issues that are important to him there. Joshua, did you have any last thoughts that you wanted to, any last messages you wanted to share with the audience?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity for having me, folks. And, thanks in advance for any donations that I might receive and any volunteer opportunities. In general, we're going to have a lot to do in the future. And I think myself as a science candidate is absolutely necessary, especially for a future generation. So my motivation is to take back that power from the bureaucrats and the government and really give that truly back to the community members that deserve it the most. And, I want to move us forward with a new vision. And so, as you can see on my platform, I'm experienced, committed leadership. And when you hire a libertarian candidate, you get a true independent voice. And so I'm able to move fast and get things done. So I appreciate your vote of confidence and all the libertarians' support and the Libertarian Party for the nomination in 2024.
Well, thank you again, Joshua, for coming on the show. Yeah. And if any of you want to find out a little more about, what motivated Josh to run, we have another episode where we recorded with him, and he talks about, a little bit about his run for office there. And this is just the start of our interviews too with libertarian candidates for the presidency. So, we hope this will be a place where you can come and find out more about these candidates because, these guys want to fight for your liberty, so you should get to know them and take a little bit of time. So thanks again so much, Josh, for joining us, and thank you out there for joining us. Until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Yes, thanks, indeed. Josh. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.